Welcome again. We began these lecture series some 4 years ago in 2009, and it takes place once per semester, twice per year, mostly centered in issues related to environment, energy, and generally anything that is related to current engineering issues in the world and in this nation. We are indebted to the organizers, and in a moment I will introduce them to you. Our campus has a lot of initiatives in the area of clean energy, including solar panels, about 4,000 square feet of it on top of Vivian Engineering Center in our area. And much of it is due to the drive, leadership, and the initiatives of our president, Dr. F. King Alexander. And it is I'm very pleased to have Dr. Alexander here, and would you please address us? Please welcome Dr. F. King Alexander.
Thank you, Dean Golshani, and thank you all for attending. This distinguished lecture series kind of gains momentum with each and every year, and I'd like to thank our advisory board and our advisory members for helping to shepherd this thing and to address very, very relevant topics. Just the other day I was looking at, and this is really aimed at our students, I was looking at our payscale.com statistics on the 50 highest paying fields of study that are out there. 1 to 50, they rank them, and 7 of the top 10 are in our College of Engineering, so you're at least headed in the right direction. And I'd also invite you, tomorrow morning we have about half a day that we're bringing in young women from 5th grade to 12th grade to learn about engineering, to introduce them to the engineering field. And we know that we've got a lot of ground as a nation to make up in this direction. It's probably one of the last fields that has not entirely turned to women because of the success of academic success of our women. But we'll have nearly 450 on campus tomorrow learning about engineering, learning about what they can do, and just trying to encourage them to pursue a career in the field of engineering. Dean Golshani mentioned some of the things that, just briefly mentioned a few of the things that we're doing on campus. I have to say that probably the most interesting or most successful clean transportation program that we put in place, our students came to us and said, what would it take, how much would it cost for us to sit down with Long Beach City Transit and work out a deal where we can just get on and go anywhere we want to with our student IDs. And we added up the coupons, and we added up a bunch of other things we were doing, and then we actually figured out that we could pay for this. So we put together a program called UPass. How many of you use UPass, or students out there? Even Provost uses UPass. Prior to this program starting, we really had about maybe 400 students a day using the city transportation, just faculty and staff. Currently, it's 10,000 students a day. That's 10,000 cars that aren't clogging the roads, that aren't looking for parking spaces, that aren't doing what they did prior to this great program. And if you imagine all the benefits of just that alone, that by itself, that one program, impacting nearly 1/3 of our entire campus each and every day. And they can use it to go to 2nd Street. They can use it to go throughout town. They can use it to stay in the community. And Long Beach City Transit has been an outstanding partner in this, and they just keep putting more and more newer buses up and running, clean buses. And so sometimes it's hard to add up how much you're saving and how much you're impacting the economy. But that's just one program that we know is impacting our campus in many ways. In fact, it's impacted my office in many ways, because that's about a couple thousand less complaints about parking that we receive every year. So it's impacted so many ways. It's been a win-win situation for our university, and it's actually become a national model of which we get calls in and out. But thank you all. You're not here to listen to what we're doing on our campus. You're here to listen to what's going on in California and all the new ideas, and where all this is going, and where all of this headed down the road. So thank you all very, very much for coming and being a part of this program, and go Beach.
I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Provost and Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs, Dr. Don Para. And Andrew Taylor, who is the Vice President for Development and University Relations. Andrew, okay. As I mentioned, this lecture series is organized by the Dean's Advisory Council of the College of Engineering, a subcommittee of the Council, whose members are Nick Sramek, who's chairing the subcommittee, Mike Nigby, Susan Fort O'Neill, Ken Peterson, Matt Petrine, and Matt Rizvani. Thank you very much for all your great work in organizing and pushing this through. This wouldn't have happened without the sponsorship and the financial backing that we've had from a number of sponsors, and we are grateful for their continued support. The sponsors are Applied Medical, Port of Long Beach, P2S Engineering, San Diego Gas and Electric, Herzog Contracting Corporation, Ford Design, and Technolink Association. Thank you very much for your support. Now to the program. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Mr. Nick Sramek, who is a project leader, senior project leader in systems engineering for the Aerospace Corporation, where he has worked for over 30 years, primarily on military satellite systems. He is an associate fellow of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics and a Computer Systems Technical Committee member. In July 2007, Mayor Bob Foster appointed Nick to a 6-year term on Long Beach Board of Harbor Commissioners, where he represents us, he's representing us on that board. He is also a member of, okay, get ready for this one, it's the long one, the Intermodal Container Transfer Facility Joint Powers Authorities Governing Board. That's wonderful. I'm proud to say that Nick is our own alum and a distinguished alum for the CSULB College of Engineering, and he earned his bachelor's and master's degrees in electrical engineering at the beach. He's also a member of the Engineering Dean's Advisory Council and is chairing the Engineering Distinguished Lecture Series Planning Committee this year. Please welcome Nick Sramek.
Thank you, Dean Golshani. I'd like to also express my welcome to everyone here. I think this is a real exciting topic, and I'd like to just get into it. I will be introducing our speakers as we go along. One thing I did want to mention was hopefully everybody got a booklet out there, and it does have the bios in there. One thing I'm going to eliminate today, so we can make sure we have plenty of time for the speakers and questions afterwards, is I'm not going to be reading bios. To me, they're always boring to read them, listen to them. So you can read them. They're great bios. Our speakers are just outstanding speakers, but they're all in the book, so I won't be reading those. Okay. This is an interesting slide. What I wanted to talk about was zero emissions future in clean transportation. One thing the Port of Long Beach did with the Port of LA last year was we put together, it's easier for me. We put together a zero emissions roadmap. And what it did was it looked at the future, set some objectives, policies, and everything in place for us to get to zero emissions at the Port of Long Beach. And the reason I want to mention this is that to get to zero emissions or clean transportation in the future, we all need to really set goals and have some type of roadmap in our minds, if nothing else. In the industry, if you're a company, you really need to go and start setting goals and have a roadmap. So we have one. I think it's real important, but I just want to make sure everybody understands that. I think you always have to have a plan. You need to know exactly where you're going, or at least generally where you're going. And really, our plan focuses on near-term technologies, a lot on near-term technologies. That's because everything's being developed today. We're working a lot of different technologies, but we need to clean up transportation today at the port. We need to clean it up in Southern California. but we need to also be looking at the future. And when you look at the future, you need to be very flexible. We don't know what what's the next technology is going to be that comes along. We don't know which ones are going to win, which ones are going to lose. Also, one size does not fit all. If we look at future transportation, 5 or 10 years from now or 20 years from now, there are going to be a bunch of different technologies out there. So when you're working technology, you really need to be very flexible when you're really looking at the future. And one thing I always harp on, everybody, when I talk about zero emissions or transportation, anything to do with the port, I always talk about scalability. We always have to go up and really look at, this is a regional issue. The ports can't do it all, Metro can't do it all, AQMD can't do it all. It has to be a collaborative effort of everybody to really get us to where we want to go. And in fact, there is a collaborative that has a number of the agencies, Southern California agencies, transportation such, along with the ports, that formed a collaborative to really set policies and really start making this forward look so we can get there. Just a little bit about technologies. We're going to see a lot of technologies today. It's fun looking at technologies, a lot of different technologies. I just mentioned a couple here. But one thing is you'll learn is technologies, we may be developing it for one mode of transportation. For instance, at the port, we're doing a lot of work developing zero emissions technologies for trucks. But this also, it migrates into other things. It'll migrate into cars. It'll migrate into public transportation. An example of that, and we didn't invent it at the ports, but is hybrid technology. Hybrid technology was developed, and now it's used in trucks, cars, public transportation. It's even being used, if you stop by the outside, it's even being used in tugboats today. So the technologies that are being developed, you have to be creative with those. Okay, and that's one thing I really want to stress is there may be a technology out there, but there are creative ways of using it. And that's why I put this picture here. Siemens developed this technology. It's a catenary system. And we've seen that in the blue line, the green line, catenary systems. These things have been around for 50, 60 years. But what this system does, it uses new technologies. It has to have good batteries in it. And it's very flexible because what happens is as this type of system will be developed, you'll have special roads that will have electric wires running above, and you'll have the catenary system, a truck come underneath it, and just come underneath it, lift the arms up, and now it can be running on electricity. It can be charging batteries and running on electricity. When it's either loading or unloading, you'll pull out from under that, lower the arms, and it'll run on batteries. So it's really a clever use of new technology, but really being very, very creative. And I think that's one thing that we need to really look at for the future is the creativity. So my challenge to you, if you're a student, get involved in these technologies. Learn to be creative in these technologies. Work on those things. I'll tell you, this is just an expanding field today. Next 5 or 10 years, there's going to be, I think it's going to be one of the biggest job opportunities out there. There are going to be good jobs out there from research, development, to manufacturing. So as a student, get involved in these type of technologies. As a professor, okay, teach your students, challenge your students, but teach them to be creative. Let them be creative. Let them really, be able to take some of these technologies and use them in different ways. Think outside the box. And of course, industry, you can make it happen. You need to make it happen. So with that, what I'd like to do is start our panel. Our first panelist is Peter Greenwald from AQMD. I've known Peter for a number of years now, and Peter, his agency is really looking at a lot of the future and policies that are being developed to help push zero emissions. And so I'd really like to introduce Peter, who will hopefully give us a little bit of view of what the future might be in some of those policies.
Thank you, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a particular pleasure because I know that we have a number of students here in the audience. I like Commissioner Sramek, would like to encourage you to get involved or consider a career involving the issues that we're going to be talking about today. California has always been an innovator when it comes to clean technologies, particularly clean transportation technologies, and there's a lot of exciting things coming in the future. I think I am the only person on this panel who does not have a technical background. My background is in law and policy in the air quality field. So I'm going to be talking briefly about some of the key drivers that are moving Southern California towards cleaner transportation technologies, touch a little bit on some potential technologies for the future, and then end with a discussion of some of the important planning efforts that will be shaping our region as we go forward. Air quality in Southern California has improved substantially over the decades. That black and white photo on the left was taken in the 1950s. Terrible smog levels, terrible visibility. The photo on the right is more recent. As one of our meteorologists described to me, the air is now clear enough generally so that you can actually see the pollution. So if you look out there on the horizon, you can see that brown nitrogen dioxide and particulate haze. We also have significant local health risks near facilities that will have the high concentration of freight movement, such as rail yards and ports and some of our highways. Like the regional pollution levels, the local pollution levels are going down due to a number of very important measures. But as I am going to get to in a moment, we still have much to do. The progress that has occurred up to now has been primarily through cleaner technologies. These have included engine modifications and, very importantly, after-treatment devices such as catalytic converters and diesel particulate filters, as well as cleaner fuels. We are at a point now where most significant sources, virtually all significant sources, are controlled by well over 90% efficiency. There are a few notable exceptions, such as the main engines on those big ships that come to our ports, locomotives, and aircraft, but there's a lot of effort being put into reducing those emissions as well. One of the key benefits and key reasons why the air quality planners focus on clean technologies is that it is a way to accommodate growth as well as the environment. And that chart here shows that we've had really massive growth in population, vehicle miles traveled, and as the chart shows, employment. At the same time, we've had reductions in air pollution levels, showing that you can have both economic growth as well as a cleaner environment. Now, as we look forward, we see a very daunting challenge, and that is that to attain federal standards, particularly the federal ozone ambient air quality standards, this region is going to need to reduce nitrogen oxides emissions by about 2/3 by 2023, and that bumps up to about 3/4 by 2032. This is a very daunting challenge, particularly since those reductions are beyond the benefits of all of the rules and programs that have been adopted to date. And this chart shows the levels of nitrogen oxides emissions in 2023, which is a key deadline year in federal law. The largest source category are heavy-duty trucks. That's the top green area. And as you go down the line, you can see off-road equipment, ships, locomotives, aircraft, passenger cars, etc. And this is the magnitude of these needed emission reductions, plus when you factor in the growth that we're going to have here, lead the air quality planners at the state as well as the local level to conclude that this region really needs to transition over the coming 2 decades to broad use of zero and near zero emission technologies, particularly technologies that will have no emissions from the tailpipes, such as electric technologies, fuel cells, and other technologies. Now, as we look forward at the planning policies, we are currently involved in in updating the air quality plan for this region. We will have another major update in 2015, which will be designed to attain those ozone air quality standards. The focus is on advancing transportation technologies, transition to the broad use of zero, near zero emission. We have and generally do have policies of fuel and technology neutrality. As Commissioner Sramek was saying, you cannot always predict where technology will lead us. And it's very important that we allow any technology to compete as long as it will meet the emissions needs. And minimizing costs, maximizing efficiency. One way to do this is through fostering co-benefits. Many of the clean energy technologies in particular can have benefits not just for local air quality, but also for energy security as well as climate. I was going to put up a list of all these potential co-benefits, but I just thought I'd pull out this cartoon from USA Today a few years back, which is, it's about climate, but it makes the same point about how climate measures can have benefits for energy independence and other factors. Not all of the co-benefits are environmental. There are economic co-benefits that are possible as well. This region spends about $45 billion a year on fossil fuels. About 80% of that is for petroleum transportation fuels. Anybody who's gone to the gasoline station recently knows that there can be great volatility in the price of petroleum fuels. As we look forward, improving or broadening energy diversity is one way to improve certainty for our businesses here, and goods movement is a key one, certainly. So some of the technologies that that look promising as we go forward. I'm not going to address all of the many technologies that are possible out there, and the speakers following me will be talking more specifically about technologies, but I did want to make a couple of general points. One key point is that much of what is needed is advancement of technology, but as Commissioner Sramek indicated, much of it is also simply what we call technology transfer from existing applications, and he showed an example of the overhead catenary. There are other examples as well. You can go out right now and you can buy a battery electric automobile. Fuel cell automobiles are now starting to be deployed. In the coming 3 years, we're expecting many more models to be hitting the roads. Plug-in hybrids are available. One of the key needs as we go forward is to move these kinds of technologies into the heavier duty sectors, such as heavy duty trucks, which, as I indicated earlier, are our single largest source of nitrogen oxides. This is starting to happen right now. With the FedEx truck photo up there is a battery electric truck, and you'll see we have currently being demonstrated hydrogen fuel cell buses and battery electric buses. The catenary trucks at the bottom have been in use for, that does a heavy mining truck has been in use for at least since the 1930s. Many places around the world there are catenary electric buses. In some places, such as in Boston, as well as Rome, these buses can leave the catenary and move ahead either based on fossil fuel or battery electric technologies. And there's that Siemens prototype that Commissioner Sramek showed. One possibility, which is being actively considered, is coupling that overhead catenary technology for the trucks with hybrid electric trucks that could be zero emission on key corridors, but then would have the flexibility to go to Las Vegas or Salt Lake City if needed. Certainly in shorter distances, such as to our warehouses, relatively smaller batteries, and batteries are a key issue, as you're going to hear in terms of weight and cost. Smaller batteries could be used and still allow a good deal of zero emission movement here in Southern California. On the rail side, many people are surprised to hear that all of those locomotives pulling all the trains in and out of the ports and through Southern California are currently propelled by electric motors. The only thing diesel about those locomotives is that there's a diesel engine that runs a generator providing electricity to the traction motors on the axles. So there are obviously other ways to get electricity to those motors, and they are in use around the world. Catenary electric power for freight and passenger locomotives. We also have dual mode locomotives, such as the second photo, which is from New York City. One of the problems we have that could be solved by a dual mode locomotive is that the United States rail system is not electrified, and so you have the issue of what do you do at the edge of this basin if you were to electrify here within this region. What happens when the trains leave, and you'd have to either switch locomotives, which would be an operational issue, or are there technological fixes such as dual mode locomotives? Another possibility, the second photo from the bottom, is an LNG tender car. In the old days, coal tender cars were used to provide power to locomotives. Well, that's an LNG tender car. It's being tested in Canada right now that would provide liquefied natural gas to the locomotive. That same concept could be used with a battery to provide power to those traction motors in areas which have high air pollution problems, such as here in the basin. When the train leaves the region, goes off to Chicago, presumably the generators on board could then charge those batteries. And finally, there are more advanced technologies such as magnetic levitation and linear synchronous motors. The engineering students here did a great project involving creation of a linear synchronous motor demonstration here. Very, very impressive. Let me turn now to some of the planning activities that are underway right now. As Commissioner Sramek said, coordinated efforts are key, and there are efforts in underway for energy planning, as well as climate and transportation and the ports, of course, as well as air quality, which are in larger part these days being coordinated to help to deploy the kinds of technologies that we've been talking about. Few examples. If you look on the AQMD website, you'll see our upcoming air quality management plan update, but also there's a report that we put on. This is a report that was jointly created by AQMD, the California Air Resources Board, and the San Joaquin District, titled Vision for Clean Air, a Framework for Air Quality and Climate Planning, where we laid out scenarios, technology scenarios, looking out into the future to meet both climate and air quality goals simultaneously. And it's very informative reading if you would like to hear more. The key messages from that are that there can be co-benefits for both types of issues. The air quality needs with our deadlines in federal law will drive the timing of technologies, though. The governor recently issued an executive order requiring or ordering the state agencies to collaborate on a number of issues related to deployment of 1.5 million zero-emission vehicles by 2025 and setting a target of 80% reduction in greenhouse gases from transportation by 2050. And there's this effort is now starting up. The Regional Transportation Plan here in Southern California, for the first time, makes it moving towards zero and near zero emission technologies, particularly for freight transport, a key element. The map that is an excerpt from that plan, shown at the bottom, shows the location of warehouses in Southern California. The point of this is that certain key corridors, if they were devoted to zero or near zero emission vehicles, could serve a large portion of the warehouses and traffic in our region. In fact, the I-710, the 60 freeway corridor are designated for these clean freight corridors. One could put a 5-mile band on either side of those corridors, and you would pick up a very large portion of the warehouses, which gives opportunity for the hybrid electric or catenary electric trucks we were talking about earlier. And the I-710 project, which is currently undergoing review under the California Environmental Quality Act, has an alternative which would devote dedicated truck lanes to zero-emission trucks. There's a couple of reports out that if you're interested in more information about catenary trucks or other kinds of zero-emission or near-zero-emission technologies that I've shown here, and we can give you the citations to those. So in closing, just to sum up, multiple strategies are going to be needed as we move forward. Certainly fuels and power transformation, or zero and near zero emission, efficiency measures, the cleanest combustion for the near term, coordinated actions not just on energy, air, climate, and transportation, but also at the local, state, and national level, because many of these types of equipment are regulated nationally. Funding for technology development. We need to foster markets for clean technologies by creating incentive programs, regulations, and clear conditions in infrastructure projects that would move towards cleaner technologies, and ultimately the power and fueling infrastructure to get around that chicken and egg problem of will there be the power and fuel available when the vehicles are there. So I will close there, and thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Peter. Next will be Daniel Abraham. He's with Argonne Labs, and he is one of the foremost authorities on lithium-ion batteries. Batteries, if you look at these technologies, and even in the next presentation, a lot of these are all based on batteries. You've got to have a battery. The better the battery, the smaller, the more efficient it is for cars, for trucks, whatever you're doing. So batteries are probably one of the most important things we're doing. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Abraham.
Good evening, and I thank you all for inviting me over here. Let me see if I can. Again, my name is Daniel Abraham, and I've been at Argonne for about 19 years. I worked on different technologies, and I've been working on battery-related technologies for about 12 years. Now, as Commissioner Sramek mentioned, batteries are all over the news. I mean, everyone is talking about batteries. But we are not the first people talking about it. In fact, Edison talked about it. And this is Scientific American, January 14, 1911. And Edison, here's a picture of Edison. Oh, sorry. Here is a picture of Edison and his improved storage battery in 1911. So if you look at the car, the battery actually takes up the trunk of the car. And Edison, as you can see, it's pretty big. And Edison expected the battery-powered cars to replace the internal combustion engine completely. It's a nickel-ion, alkaline battery. In fact, it has a range of 144 miles, a 230-kilometer range. The average speed is about 12.3 miles per hour, so it won't work very well today. The weight of the battery is about more than 1,000 kilograms. And so it is, in fact, it probably weighs as much as the rest of the car. The energy density, this is something that I'm going to bring up again, 30 to 50 watt-hours per kilogram. And the cell voltage is about 1.2 volts. So where are we now 100 years later? Let's see. OK, so where are we now 100 years later? And as the previous speaker pointed out, there are many different types of battery-powered cars available. You have the HEV, which is the Toyota Prius. The Prius is actually a combination of an internal combustion engine and a battery. So it's considered a hybrid or a hybrid electric vehicle. It's a car that you don't have to plug in. It gives you roughly of the order of 50 miles per gallon. It's a 1 kilowatt-hour battery. And the cost of the battery is about $1,200 if it's actually produced on a mass scale. The next one is a PHEV. That is the example of a PHEV or a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle is a Chevy Volt. The car is operated purely, it has an internal combustion engine, but the battery actually does all the work. The cost of the battery at this time is about $10,000. And the miles equivalent for the car is about 100 miles per gallon. But that's obviously miles equivalent in terms of if the gas was ever used. And then obviously you have the electric vehicles, and the example of an electric vehicle is a Nissan Leaf. The Leaf, it's about a 24 kilowatt-hour battery. The cost of the battery at this current time, if it's produced on a mass scale, is about $15,000. So obviously, the cost of a small car at this time, it's much, much more expensive than the cost of than where we would like it to be. So the affordability of the battery and the performance of the battery are key to enable large market penetration of hybrid and electric vehicles. And that's obvious. And those are the kinds of things that we work on. So why are advanced batteries needed? Obviously, advanced batteries enable new vehicle platforms. For example, you could have the micro battery that which are considered start-stop batteries, or you have a Micro 2, which has not only the start-stop, but it also has regenerative braking. Now, most of the time, this regenerative braking technology is something that's there in the Prius. That is, when you put your brakes on, instead of the energy being lost as heat, you can capture the energy and store it into the battery. That's called regenerative braking technology. You have the mild hybrids, which are the examples of the Honda Civic. And in the mild hybrids, the battery is actually used for power assist or for acceleration. That is, when you push your gas pedal on, the battery is discharged, and it provides the oomph or the power to move the cars very fast. So it is used for acceleration. And also, when you put your brakes on, the battery gets charged up, which is regenerative charging. You have the full hybrid, which has electric driving, but it also has an internal combustion engine. The plug-in hybrids, the example is the Chevy Volt, and the Nissan Leaf, which is an electric vehicle. So when you go to these technologies, like the micro-hybrid technologies, you have the lead-acid batteries. Here you can use the nickel-metal hydride batteries, and here the lithium-ion batteries. And as you go to the right, you have added electric function, and also the efficiency becomes much greater. So why lithium ions for plug-in hybrid vehicles and electric vehicles? And the answer for that is simple. It all has to do with volumetric and gravimetric energy density. What does that mean? It means how much energy can you pack within a space, within a small amount of space. That is, the volumetric energy is actually watt-hour per liter. And the greater the volumetric energy, the smaller the battery, which is why lithium-ion batteries have become much more popular now. Remember, Edison's battery took up the trunk of the car, whereas modern batteries like lithium-ion batteries, and especially many of the technologies that we work on, it'll probably take up maybe about a quarter or less than a quarter, the size of your trunk, and we are trying to make it even smaller. The other thing is the gravimetric energy density, which is the amount of charge or the amount of energy that is stored per unit weight. So greater the gravimetric energy density, the lighter the battery. Now, you folks may remember the cell phones of the 80s, the Motorola cell phones of the 80s, those things that look like big bricks. One of the reasons they look like bricks were most of it was the battery. When you use those batteries, when the gravimetric energy density of the battery is small, and the energy density is small, the batteries are bigger and heavier. So the reasons you can have these smaller cell phones or consumer electronics now is because the batteries have become much more powerful. They become, the energy that can be stored in a small scale, in a small space, has increased dramatically. And that has happened because of these lithium technologies, and they continue to improve now. In fact, I think there was a recent press article by a company called NVS Systems in Palo Alto, in the Palo Alto area, where they were able to get close to 400 watt-hours per kilogram. So double of that is stored in this chart. And by the way, this chart is about 10 years old, so obviously we have gone way beyond. And for portable energy storage systems, the weight and the volume are very important. Now, if you have for the electric utilities or for grid, the energy densities are not that critical because say, for example, if you're trying to capture and store energy from the sun, you could have a battery system that's as big as the furnace of your house, and it doesn't really matter because it takes up a little bit of space, but you're not kind of carrying it around. Weight and volume are not that critical. But for cars, for space, for consumer electronics, the weight and volume are very important. So I talked about lithium-ion cell. I thought I'll just kind of throw in this just to show you guys what happens. Essentially what happens in a lithium-ion cell is, or in any battery, you have a positive electrode, a negative electrode, and an electrolyte. So essentially, a battery contains 2 electrodes and an electrolyte, and all you're doing is, during charging, you move lithium ions from one side, from this positive electrode to the negative electrode, and when that happens, an electron kind of moves through the external circuit. So essentially during charging, that is when you plug in your cell phone into the wall, what you're doing is you're moving a lithium ion from one side of the battery to the other, from the positive electrode to the negative electrode. When you need to use up your battery, that is when you are speaking on the phone or when you're driving the car, essentially the reverse happens. The lithium ion's moving the opposite direction, and an electron goes through the external circuit, and it does some work. That is, it allows you to speak on the phone, or it allows you to drive on the car. So essentially, charging requires energy, and discharging supplies energy. And the process reversibility should be roughly pretty close to 100% for good cycle life. Because if you want to, let's assume that you charge and discharge your battery every day. That is, you plug in your car at night, and during the next day, you kind of use it all up. If you want your car to last about 10 years, you need about 3,650 cycles. So you need to be able to do this process about 4,000 times, or maybe even more, so that your batteries can last the life of your car, between 10 and 15 years. That's our goal. And there are different strategies to kind of to improve the life. But essentially, the main thing is that you need to be able to move these lithium ions back and forth. If for some reason the ions get trapped in some side reactions, then your life decreases. So you want the efficiency of the charge and discharge process to be close to 100%. That is, all the energy that you put in the battery, you want to be able to get back. That's what is the 100%. That's what the 100% stands for. Now, people, in general, when people think about lithium ion, you think about one chemistry. But the truth is that lithium ion chemistry is not a single chemistry. There are multiple cathodes, and there are multiple anodes that can be used. So there are many, many different kinds of materials that we have worked on over the past decade, and people have been doing this. There are even more materials that people are discovering. And depending upon which positive electrode you put together, and depending upon which negative electrode, so depending upon which couple, the positive and the negative electrode couple, you can get different power, different energy. The weight of the batteries can be different. The life can be different. There are many of these things. Because the chemistry is so flexible, we can, there are many possibilities. So what's in the future? We started out with, I talked about Edison's battery, which is about 30 to 50 watt-hour per kilogram. And the lead-acid batteries can meet about that now. Then you have the nickel-cadmium batteries, the nickel-metal hydride batteries, which are used in the Prius. The lithium-ion battery is the current technology which is used in the Nissan Leaf. Gives you about 140 watt-hour per kilogram, about 100-mile distance. And there are other technologies that we are working on that can give between 200 and 300 kilometers. And then people talk about zinc air, lithium sulfur, and lithium oxygen batteries. Most of these are under development. The ones on the left are available now. They're under development, meaning there is still a lot of work that needs to be done. And I will stop there just after this overview, and I can answer questions during the question and answer session. I thank the Department of Energy, the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office of Vehicle Technologies, and all my other colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Next speaker is, hopefully this keeps working, is Heather Tomley from the Port of Long Beach. Heather at the Port of Long Beach, those people at the Port of Long Beach know Heather. We depend on Heather for knowing all about the different technologies. She can probably walk through probably every technology that's happening at the Port of Long Beach. I depend on her when I need to know something about technology, zero emissions. She has helped me, understand that and the path to zero emissions. So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Heather Tomley.
Thank you very much. I was asked to talk today about some of the things that we're doing at the port specifically. We've talked a little bit about things that we need to do, where things are going. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the practical applications, some of the actual technologies that we've been demonstrating and trying to understand how they can actually work in port operations to help us to meet our emission reduction goals. So some of you may be wondering why the ports are even involved with technology advancement. We're not the operators of the actual ports. We're actually, the Port of Long Beach is a city department. And we lease the land to terminal operators who actually conduct all of the port operations. Technology advancement, too, we're also not a business that's going to be in the market of selling these pieces of equipment and making money off of it. But we are a large industrial complex that's located right next to local communities that have a lot of concerns about the negative impacts, the pollution that can be generated from port operations. And so we've really placed a big emphasis at the port to do what we can. Our board adopted a policy to do what we can to reduce our impacts to the local communities. And primarily one of the main goals is really to reduce our air quality impacts on local communities. And so going along with that, we set a long-term goal that we're committed to work with our port operators to maximize the emission reductions that we can achieve through port operations, and we set a goal to move towards zero emission technologies. We know that for us to meet the long-term goals that we've established for emission reductions and health risk reductions, we really need to move towards zero emission operations, and we're working very carefully with the port operators, with the regional agencies, as well as the technology developers to help us get there. So in 2006, the ports worked together, the Port of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles worked together. We brought in the air regulatory agencies, EPA, California Air Resources Board, and South Coast Air Quality Management District to come up with our plan. What did we need to do to address all of the impacts from port emissions, and what kinds of strategies could we implement to move forward with that? One of the first programs that we adopted after we established the plan was our Technology Advancement Program, and that's because we knew that for us to meet the reduction goals that we wanted to meet, it was going to take more than what was available today. We needed to move technologies further to help us to reduce those emissions. We established an advisory committee with the air quality regulatory agencies. We wanted to be able to draw upon their technical expertise. We wanted to be able to work with them to identify matching funds that could help our funding go a little bit further and test a few more technologies. And we also established good, strong working relationships with our port operators, and also started reaching out to technology developers to come up with technologies that could really be applied in the ports. Each year, each port commits $1.5 million, so we have a $3 million annual budget. We require that the technology developers provide a 50% cost match, at least 50% cost match. We also seek out grant opportunities to try to maximize the dollars that we have available to move these technologies forward. Our goals for the TAP are pretty simple. We want to encourage the development of innovative technologies that can be applied in the ports, in port operations, which can be a little bit unique in the things that we do and the demands that are placed on the equipment that need to be able to operate in the ports. We also wanted to prove that, the technologies could meet those heavy demands with the heavy weights that they have to carry, the distances that they have to operate within, that they have to operate for multiple shifts, and so if there's recharge times with batteries, all of those types of considerations needed to be able to actually work in the port environment. We also wanted to move these technologies towards commercialization. We didn't want to view these demonstrations as independent science projects. We actually wanted these technologies to be things that were moving towards actual commercialization so that the port operators could purchase them and actually start using them once these demonstrations have been completed. We also wanted to improve emission reductions at the ports, and also building on that, we wanted to move towards zero-emission technologies, and as Commissioner Sramek identified, last year we adopted our roadmap towards zero emissions, which really sort of laid the groundwork for what were the things that we needed to do in the near term to meet our long-term goals. And so we've been moving forward with a lot of technologies that are zero-emission or near-zero emissions to really help us move towards that ultimate goal. The air pollution source categories that we're talking about in the port application specifically, we're looking at the ships, the on-road trucks, hovercraft, terminal equipment, and locomotives. And so to date, we've been able to complete 16 technology demonstration projects. We have 7 that are currently underway, and we've committed over $7.5 million to these projects in the last few years. I'm going to be talking about some of the specific projects that we've been able to do that are zero or near zero technologies to go along with the topic of what we're talking about. One of the first projects that we've worked on, and this was primarily a Port of Los Angeles project working together with the Air Quality Management District, is the Balcon Electric Terminal Tractor. And what this is an all-battery electric terminal tractor. And terminal tractors are used in the port terminals to move containers between the ships and the stacks, or between the stacks and the on-dock rail yards. It's the most prevalent piece of equipment that's out on the terminals, and they're working constantly while the port's in operation. These terminal tractors are zero emissions. They've gone through, over the last several years, many different generations of this technology, and I think that's an important point of the technology development that we're talking about here, is you're not going to hit a home run the first time that you put something out there. This is a process, and these demonstrations really help us to understand what works, what doesn't work, where improvement is needed. And so this yard tractor is currently in its 4th generation. It started off with a lead-acid battery. It's now got a lithium-ion battery. It's got an improved battery management system. The technology, the latest generation of this technology, is currently being demonstrated, and it appears that it's working as they're expecting, being able to operate for a full shift and carry a full load. Vicon, the regen flywheel, this one is unique that it used a flywheel as a battery, as an energy storage device, as opposed to using a system like a battery. And what it does is, as the rubber tire gantry crane, which is the big square-shaped crane, those are used to move the containers between the stacks and the trucks. And so they have to be able to lift pretty heavy loads with the containers. And as the containers are lowered, it stores energy in the flywheel. As it lifts the containers back up, it is able to draw upon that stored energy. This technology was verified as a level 1 emission control device. This is what we're talking about when we work with the regulatory agencies to prove how well these technologies actually work. There are verification and certification processes with the regulatory agencies that really provide information and provide certainty for how well these technologies really do perform. This one was verified as a level 1 device, which means that it was able to achieve at least 25% particulate reduction. In addition, this device also reduces nitrogen oxide emissions by 30% and greenhouse gases by 30% at several of the terminals throughout the ports. The capacity FET, this is a plug-in hybrid electric terminal tractor where it operates in zero emission mode for short distances on full electric power, and then as the battery is depleted to a certain level, it kicks on the diesel engine and operates in hybrid mode, and it can be recharged by plugging into a charging station. There were emission reductions and fuel savings that were confirmed. Unfortunately, with this technology, the engine that they're using in it is not certified for sale in the state of California. So they're focusing their efforts on applying these technologies in other areas. But as a next generation, Capacity has teamed up with Vision, and they're working on the zero emission terminal tractor, which is a battery electric terminal tractor that uses a fuel cell as a range extender, and so it can operate in full zero emission mode. That tractor is currently being developed, and we're hoping to start demonstrating it soon. One of the earlier projects that we had worked on is the U.S. hybrid terminal tractor. This one is a traditional diesel hybrid system where it had a downsized hybrid engine along with a battery system. We ran 3 of these side by side with diesel in day-to-day operations. Unfortunately, at the end, it didn't perform quite as well as we had hoped. And again, I think that's an important lesson learned as we go through these things, that we really need to put them into practical application, understand how they work, and understand what kind of improvements need to be made. So based off of this demonstration that we were able to do, U.S. Hybrid is now working on another generation of this technology that they're going to be demonstrating at the ports in New York and New Jersey. The EcoPower Eco Crane is another hybrid system that uses a battery system as an energy storage device in the same way that the flywheel system stored energy as it dropped the container and used it as it lifted it. This one uses the battery system for that same sort of energy assist. This system, the original system that we demonstrated in the Port of Long Beach, again had some electrical issues that the manufacturer had to work through. They developed a second generation, and it's currently in testing at the Port of Los Angeles and is operating much better and is providing significant fuel savings. I wanted to throw in a couple of vessel technologies because this is an area, it's a big area of focus for the Port of Long Beach because vessels are our largest source of emissions. This one isn't exactly hybrid or zero emissions, but it's one of the ones that we've tested to try to reduce emissions from vessels. What this does is it captures emissions from the vessel while the vessel's at berth, routes the exhaust through a landside treatment system to reduce emissions. There's additional testing underway of this system right now, and we're hoping that we can prove that it can work in operations over a longer period of time. Another system that we're testing is a seawater scrubber system that was developed by Bluefield Holdings and Crystalon. And this uses a chamber on the exhaust stack of the vessel and draws seawater into that chamber to remove the particulates and other pollutants. And this demonstration that we conducted is currently wrapping up. We're analyzing the data right now, but we're expecting significant particulate reductions from that. So building off of one of the comments that Commissioner Sramek had made that you can test these technologies in one application and apply it to others, Balcon, I showed the slide earlier of the terminal tractor that we were testing with them. They're applying that same technology to an on-road truck as well and testing a lithium-ion battery. The demonstration for this is they've gone through some preliminary testing and they're about to put it in actual in-use testing. And also, similarly, the Vision terminal tractor technology, we're also applying something similar for the on-road trucks. We're hoping to be able to demonstrate this soon as well. The technology is currently going through some additional work, and once that's completed, we should be able to start the demonstration before the end of the year. And I hope you all had an opportunity to talk with Ed outside. He was here. He's with Foss Maritime. Foss has really done some innovative work to applying hybrid technologies in assist tugs. And this was the first ever hybrid tugboat that was developed in the world. It uses battery power that the tug can operate off of the batteries in the idle mode, and then during low loads, it can use extensive battery power and really not have to use the main engines nearly as much. They've been able to produce significant emission reductions, and based off of the success of the first generation that they did, they were able to take the technology and retrofit it into an existing tugboat. The demonstration for the retrofit technology just recently completed. So these are operating in the Port of Long Beach and Los Angeles. So what's next for us? We have a lot of technology demonstrations that are currently underway. We're getting proposals all of the time, and we're moving forward with the technologies in demonstration that we feel like have a good opportunity to be able to address port operations and are a good fit. We have a high priority on finding zero emission technologies and technologies that can work for vessels. We're continuing to promote technology developers to focus on the port sector market. Even though we think we're pretty big, sometimes in the whole world of things, we're actually not that big of a operator, and some of the equipment that operates down in the ports is really pretty specialty. And so getting the technology developers to really focus on that market is something that we're promoting. Continuing to work with the agencies and with the operators to be able to move these things forward, and that's it. Thank you very much.
I guess it says Southern California Gas, but it's Sempra. I think your real job is with Sempra Utilities, correct? And Jeff hopefully is going to go and really put together all this. How are we going to take these technologies and really make them useful down the road and really and get someplace with zero emission technologies. Jeff.
Thank you very much. I'll do my best to do that. And to the question of who I work for, Sempra Energy owns two sister utilities, San Diego Gas and Electric Company and Southern California Gas. And we have officers from each. We have Mike Nigley and Hal Snyder. So we'll take a very balanced perspective on technology here. And we'll also see if, in fact, I can work a microphone, a clicker, speak at the same time. I did spit my gum out. Whoops. Okay. So as Commissioner Sramek said, I'm going to sort of take a macro view here and talk a little bit about technologies, but mostly I'm going to talk about what it will take to make whichever technologies are successful in the end into vibrant markets and things that we consider conventional looking back at that point in time. So there's some things we know and there's some things we don't know. What we do know with a reasonable certainty, based both on the fact that it's mandated by regulation and what we can see in line of sight on technology development, is the vehicles will be 50% or more efficient than they are today. That's with CAFE fuel standard, but that's also with alternative drivetrains, electric fuel cell, and other. So I think we can be certain that those technologies will be there. I think we can be certain that there will be millions of alternative fuel vehicles on the road within 10 years or so. We've already seen in the past 10 years that hybrid electric vehicles, conventional gasoline electric hybrids, have achieved about 2 million. So I think it's pretty clear that we're going to be able to get to these levels with the next generation of alternative fuel vehicles. A single technology winner is unlikely. We don't know for sure, but it seems unlikely. If you look back at the picture we saw with Mr. Edison, who was known to be sort of curmudgeonly, he's probably not happy about his 2-ton battery and not being able to sell that to his standards. And then Mr. Stanley of Stanley Steamer isn't in the picture anymore. And we did come to a single winner simply because of the energy density and the advances in liquid fuels. I don't think that's going to be the case this time around because these technologies, if you forecast them out to next generation, are pretty close in many instances. So I think we're going to have multiple technologies in play. We can be certain that there will be large amounts of money made and lost in this process, and that's the American way, right? There's going to be some Edison batteries and some Stanley Steamers, but there's going to be some Googles and some whatever. I won't say Facebook. So what we don't know. Well, we don't know the precise path the markets will take. And when, one of the things I think our perspective would be within the Sempra companies is that when policy is made to try to be over-predictive about that, we can go in wrong directions, spend money in wrong places, and over-manage the market. And we don't know what technology breakthroughs will be made or exactly when they'll be made. So what makes a market, referring here, of course, to alternate fuel vehicles, it takes a few things coming together at the same time to make markets self-sustainable and successful. And this applies actually both to passenger and heavy-duty vehicles in slightly different ways. So one is vehicle choice. And, for these markets to form, there have to be vehicles around that meet the requirements of the consumers of those vehicles. If it's a passenger vehicle, it's going to have to do with everything from styling to range to particular type of vehicle. When it comes to commercial vehicles, it has to do with duty cycle, load, what's referred to as vocation, what it actually does every day. Does it need to have high torque to pull stuff, these kind of things. So you need to be able to meet those requirements. There needs to be a convenient way to put fuel in the vehicle, and how much of a challenge that is depends on the particular technology you're talking about. Down at the bottom, there needs to be consumer confidence, and that could be private people buying passenger cars. That applies to businesses as well. And what that means is that to make a purchase decision, you have to be comfortable you're not buying a Betamax. So you have to think that at least for the reasonable economic life of the product, that it's going to be successful. And then all of this has to be in the context of economics that work reasonably well for the customer. There is history to show that rapid adoption of new technologies can happen. It's one thing to look in situations where something's new to the world and it's not replacing anything. It's a new functionality and a new idea. More difficult sometimes to penetrate in markets where there's a pre-existing solution. Hybrid electric vehicle sales in this chart on your left represents all hybrid electric vehicles. The majority of the sales, as you would imagine, are Prius vehicles. But I've shown it through 2007. That's the year in which the hybrid electric vehicle market crossed 1 million. So it took them, less than 8 years to get to 1 million vehicles. So in that case, if you think about the triangle, you didn't need new infrastructure. So you needed to convince consumers this was a good car, make product available, but it was able to come in. On the right, we show natural gas vehicles for international markets. Many of you may not be aware that there are 15 million passenger natural gas vehicles in use in the world, and in the markets where those vehicles are in use, the original equipment manufacturer auto companies have made vehicles available. At the same time, though, in those markets, all of which have conventional petroleum diesel vehicles as well, the government needed to organize a process by which infrastructure could be put in place to serve those vehicles. So if you think about, again, this triangle, which is kind of the framework for what I'm talking about, on the vehicle choice, there's positive signs. Those of us that work in this area, the low-emission vehicle area, going back 5 years ago, we're probably saying, oh my gosh, is this going to be the 90s again? Are we going to, who killed the electric car, and, is any of this stuff for real? No one still knows for sure, because we're not quite there yet, but signs are much more positive than they were, and certainly the availability of vehicle choices is much greater. There are, not even talking about conventional hybrids, there are plug-in hybrids coming into the markets. There are announcements within the next 24 months of at least 5 fuel cell vehicles coming into the market. There's already quite an array of battery electric vehicles. In the U.S., we have the Honda Civic as the passenger sedan available for natural gas and a couple of trucks. In Europe, there are 40 natural gas vehicle models commercially available. So one key across virtually all of these is that we need to reduce cost. So this curve actually was produced by one of the auto manufacturers, and it looks daunting because although there's no scale on the axis, it reflects a reduction in cost of a factor of about 100. But it is, in fact, tractable in experience with automotive parts and things like that. It's more doable than it looks. But I think the issue is if you come down from 100 to 1 versus 2 versus 0.5, it's a big difference on the learned out cost. But getting down to these, through these orders of magnitude, going from prototype to mass production is actually, there's evidence to show that that can be done, and that needs to be done in the electric vehicle and the fuel cell vehicle side for those to reach cost parity with alternatives. The other piece of the triangle that's very important is infrastructure, and this varies by which type of technology we're looking at. Electric vehicles, depending on how they're charged, might not need any new infrastructure. So the electric vehicle technologies benefit from the fact that, number one, there's currently pretty ubiquitous capability to charge vehicles, and where there is a need for new installations, they're cheaper. They're in the tens or $50,000 even for fast charging versus, let's say, a hydrogen station, which can cost $1 to $2 million. But I had to, I didn't originally plan to use a log scale on this chart, but it was necessary to use one to show the data where you could still see the hydrogen. So these are the publicly accessible fueling infrastructure locations available. We can be proud all 9 of those hydrogen stations are in California. So it'll be, it's important, obviously. I think most of us prefer market forces to determine how these technology competitions, so to speak, play out, but there will be some need for some forms of jump-starting infrastructure if we want some of these technologies to be part of the mix, and hydrogen being a good example. Oops, wrong way. So one thing I wanted to point out here, representing 2 utilities here this evening, is that there is opportunity for integration and synergy with existing infrastructure, in this case, speaking of ours. Now, the same is true of conventional fueling outlets in some cases with hydrogen and natural gas where co-location could work. But on the electric side, we have a lot of potential to use batteries during, possibly, but certainly at the end of their useful life for storage to support intermittency of renewables and things of that sort, to use smart charging to increase the utilization of the grid, which brings rates down. And then on the natural gas side, of course, the motor vehicle fuel delivery system would be the natural gas infrastructure, but there are two renewable sources that could be brought into that picture as well, which is biomethane, which is organically produced natural gas, and hydrogen or hydrogen blends potentially have synergy with our infrastructure as well. Oops. So which solutions will win? Again, as I said in the beginning, we don't really know. There's a lot of contenders. You have electric and hybrid electric drive, hydrogen fuel cell, natural gas, including use of natural gas with biomethane and aftertreatment, which makes it very, very near zero. And then biofuels, liquid biofuels, or gaseous biomethane. So liquid biofuels are great, especially if they're drop-in, as that's called, because they don't need new infrastructure, but they're very expensive. Right now, they're maybe $40 a gallon to produce. So all of these things have potential. Which ones ultimately win depend in the end on what the cost per mile is, other factors of fitness for use, consumer preference, and how you're using the vehicle. So I think it's likely that there will be multiple solutions in the end game. An example of these trade-offs, and I'm not going to go through all this, but this is just an example of some analysis that was done on transit buses and looking at a whole collection of different things. This was done via the gas company, so we specifically looked at some compressed natural gas configurations as well as diesel, electric fuel cell, and others. And, I think the point to be made here is that there are a lot of different technology configurations that can lead to similar emission reduction outcomes, and the costs may differ a lot based on technologies and technology maturity. One piece of good news is that there's a lot of commonality in some of the technology development areas that are being worked, very much so if you're talking about anything related to internal combustion engines, where a lot of the engine efficiency things are quite common across. But when you come down to drivetrain and then things like aerodynamics, low rolling resistance tires, ultralight, ultra-high strength materials, all of those things apply equally regardless of what your favorite drivetrain is. One additional example of technology synergy I wanted to give here, it's an interesting one related to some of the South Coast Air Quality Management District discussion about path to zero and path to near zero. There's a technology being developed in a number of places, including the University of Missouri, which is a carbon-based micro or nanostructured material that's sort of, think of it like a sponge, and it allows gaseous, gas, in the case we're looking at would be methane or hydrogen, to be stored at higher energy density and lower pressure than in an empty vessel. So what that does is move you from thick-walled to thin-walled tanks. It's cheaper to produce. It would allow you to put fuel storage in places that are unused rather than, kind of an ASME vessel and where you can put that. So we were talking to this, the inventor or the principal investigator on this about methane, and he just sort of mentioned along the way, oh yeah, we tested this, it works just as well, if not better, for hydrogen. So what's needed to make all this happen? Private capital, and significant amounts of it. Fortunately, in this industry, you have the auto manufacturers who have a lot of capital to invest, but when it comes to venture capital and other entrepreneurial types of funding, we need to have clear and stable policies so they know what they're getting into and that they're not going to have kind of the rug pulled out from under them on the policy side. We need continued public investment in R&D, and the DOE, I think, has been doing a good job in their transportation programs, and they're recently added one on the natural gas side. We need well-designed, performance-based, and I should say technology-neutral incentives with a graduation plan, meaning we kind of know when we design them how long they're going to be needed and what their purpose is, only where needed, and to jumpstart markets, and considering in those investment programs both infrastructure and vehicles. And so what's the prize? Clean air, rejuvenation of American manufacturing, freedom from foreign energy, great interesting jobs for engineers, and even if you're not an engineer, maybe, and $3.8 trillion in net present value, according to Amory Lovins, who's the head of the Rocky Mountain Institute, one of the pioneers of green and clean energy, in a recent book he wrote called Reinventing Fire, which I recommend to you if you're interested. but his calculation based on health benefits, national security, formation of new industries, et cetera, was that, you know, even accounting for casualties along the way, it's going to be worth $3.8 trillion in gross domestic product over 10 or 20 years to proceed toward clean transportation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I hope you all enjoyed that. I'll tell you, really, I took it from A to Z kind of in looking at low emissions, zero emissions technology and what's going on. We're going to go to question and answer period. I'd like to spend a little time letting people ask questions. First thing I want to do is because I'll forget it if we otherwise, is announce our next lecture is going to be Thursday, April 25th next year. So you'll be getting more notice on the date. I'm not sure what the subject is yet, but we'll find a good subject for you. Hopefully you're interested. Okay, I'd like to open it up for questions. Hang on. What I'll do is we'll go ahead and use the stand. And Mike, you have a question?
I'll just start one for Daniel. The Tesla company is actually starting to deliver their all-electric sedans that have mileage range of about 340 miles this month. And my understanding is that is using the lithium-ion battery as sort of a lot of lithium-ion batteries in the car. But to get to the extra high densities that you had identified in your talk, do we have to have what kind of breakthrough do we have to have? Do we have to have a physics breakthrough, or is this just a manufacturing improvement breakthrough to get us to really where we're much closer to the prize?
Oh, okay, just to be specific about the Tesla uses what we call 18650 cells. 18650, these cells are slightly bigger than the AA cells. And there's a whole bunch of them. Probably, I think they string about 7,000 of these cells in their battery packs. So it's quite an engineering challenge. Now, one of the reasons they use these 18650 cells, or these standard cells, is because they are mass-produced. I mean, I have a friend who's the vice president of R&D at Samsung, and he says these are made at machine gun bullet speeds. I mean, they kind of crank them out at very high speeds. So one of the reasons, the manufacturing for these cells is so good and the reliability is so good that that's one of the reasons that Tesla decided that if you kind of string them all together, it's better than kind of developing newer technologies. So many of the technologies that we work on, we know that the performance of these materials, I talked about lithium-ion cell not being a single technology. There are multiple technologies. So we can get very high energy densities. The thing that we are working on now is the life of a battery. So the performance can be very good in the beginning, but can we sustain it over a period of 10 years or 15 years? So when I talk in terms of performance, you have the energy density, that is, can we sustain the energy over a period of time? The other thing that's important, especially for hybrid electric vehicles, is power. Power is the rate at which the energy is delivered. That is, the Tesla, I think, goes from about 0 to 60 in about 4 seconds, especially the high-end versions. But will it do that after 2 years, after 5 years? So the materials, I'm sure the new materials will continue to be discovered. But at this time, to transfer the information that we have to the market, we are still working on improving the life of the battery and also the cost. Can we bring the cost of these things down? Another important thing is also the safety, because to get these high energy densities, we have to use electrolytes which are organic-based. And in some cases, I know you guys have heard of laptops catching fire. So we want to make sure that these batteries don't catch fire, and that's another technique. But there are ways to change that into things like solid electrolytes, which can help. So.
Other questions? Actually, I have one for Peter, and maybe if there's anybody else who wants to jump in on this. And one thing at the ports is we've developed a methodology to measure the reduction in pollution. And I'm wondering what's done for the whole region, for Southern California. How do we measure as we reduce the pollution from, especially vehicles, as we see all this new stuff coming along? How do we, are there ways we measure it? How do we really know that we're really reducing the pollution?
Dead canaries.
Well, we have a rather extensive effort to develop emission inventories as part of our air quality plan from a wide variety of sources. In fact, the ports are very much involved in that effort. Everything from monitoring devices on stationary sources to the port estimates of emissions from their sources. We also have a ambient monitoring network to determine the actual pollution levels in the atmosphere and correlate those for our plan. So it's a rather involved effort that's been going on now for decades.
Okay. Heather, I don't know if you want to talk about what the port does.
Sure.
I think it's interesting because you know, how do you really know that you're really achieving some of these, especially when you start getting regulations and you know mandatory numbers that we have to reach? How do you really know you're there? So if Heather, you want to talk about what the port
Right,
does.
I can add a little bit, and really what we do is sort of a small subset of what AQMD does. We do our own emissions inventory for our own port sources, where we actually go out to all of the operators and get real activity data for how they used their equipment over the last year, what equipment they were using, what the model year was, what the emission standards were for the engines, what type of fuel they were using, all of that. And we come up with a specific annual emissions inventory, and we use that like our report card, so we can really understand how things are changing year to year for port-specific equipment. But one of the other things that we also do is we have an air monitoring network that we've set up. We have 2 stations in the port. Port of Long Beach, Port of LA has some stations as well, and we have that information all goes live to a real-time website. So if you're ever interested, go onto our website and you can take a look at that. It's got air quality data and weather data in the port area, but that gets all of the regional sources. So it's not port specific, but it can provide an indicator of what's happening with the air quality in general in that area. So, but it would pick up other things. So we've seen some reductions there as well. But for the real port specific stuff is the emissions inventory.
Great, thank you, Heather. Other questions? Come on. It's an interesting field. Oh, yes. You want to come up here? Be easier.
So you mentioned that NVIDIA came up with a 400 watt-hours per kilogram battery recently. I was wondering what is the actual promise of that? Because I remember seeing a website on there and saw that they only demonstrated the energy capacity for about 5 cycles before there was a significant drop in energy.
Well, actually, they demonstrated it for about 300 cycles, I think.
Great.
But our target is 3,000 cycles. The other thing is that there are many engineering solutions to making a battery. That is, it's not only the materials themselves, but also how do you make the electrodes and what kind of electrolyte that you use. There are different kinds of cells. So Tesla uses what we call cylindrical cells, but there are also pouch cells. And depending upon what type of cells you use, you can increase the energy density of these batteries. The question is, can we mass produce them? Can we produce them on such a scale, you know, at a rate, at the machine gun rate, so that, because if you can do that at that rate, then these batteries become relatively cheap. It's always, at this time, I mean, you need to achieve the economies of scale. If you can do that, then that's what brings the costs down. So the 400 watt-hours, again, it has to do with the initial performance, and the answer is yes, they are able to do that. Can they make it on a very large scale? I mean, can they get the economies of scale? The answer is no at this time, but they're kind of working on it. And how practical is that? I think it's only a matter of time before we kind of move in that direction.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
This may be a lethal question to ask for the engineers, but we've heard a lot about technology breakthrough. We've heard a lot about the economics and the regulatory environment. to make this work, what role would a political breakthrough make in pushing this much more quickly up? Pardon me, forward. Do we need a comprehensive national policy and approach on this kind of stuff?
I can take a first shot at that.
Who wants to take a shot at that?
Actually, that's a very important question. As I said, I've been kind of working on batteries for about 12 years, but we didn't really get much attention until about 4 years ago, when until about 4 years ago, there were no lithium-ion manufacturing facilities in the U.S. Everything was concentrated. Maybe about 10 years ago, everything was in Japan. 10 years ago, one of the top people from Samsung, from Korea, came to us and said, in 2010, we will be the #1 battery maker in the world, for lithium-ion battery maker in the world. And they did that. So Samsung actually makes the largest number of consumer electronics. The US, until 2008, had zero. We did nothing. Since President Obama came to power, I mean, one of his first statements was, we were the ones who invented the technology. Most of the science, most of the research was done in the US. Everything that was done with respect to lithium-ion technology was actually started in the US. But all the technology was commercialized in Asia. It was commercialized in Japan, Korea, and now China. But President Obama said, how can we have cars? I mean, we have these great cars, but all of them use batteries that are made elsewhere in the world. We have to have battery manufacturing facilities in the US. So when the stimulus came, there was a lot of money being put into manufacturing facilities in the US, which now in this election season is very controversial because it's talking about supplementing the funds for the private industry. But also we got a portion of the pie. I mean, there was some money also being put into research, and that has helped build our research infrastructure too. So we had some infrastructure, but we are able to build it up a little bit more because when it comes to market forces, we do not know who will survive and who will fail. Eventually, until all of us start buying these battery-powered cars, there won't be the economies of scale that I keep talking about. But when that happens, and again, when it comes to the batteries, when it comes to these industries, there were several companies that were funded with these recovery funds, but 2 of them are already bankrupt. And we don't know what's going to happen. But it's very likely that one of them will survive and prosper. So the US has gone from having no lithium-ion manufacturing facilities to tremendous capability. And the question is, not in consumer electronics, but certainly when it comes to transportation. And with respect to the grid, too. I mean, there are these facilities for the grid, too. So politics makes a huge impact. And we will see how that energy policy, politics makes a huge impact, and that could change, hopefully for the better.
Yeah, Jeff, I don't know if you want to fill in that. Actually, I had a question similar to that too, because it's the private investment. You know, how do we get the private investment, for instance, in batteries? Do we really need government intervention? Do we need grants, programs? Do we need, you know, how do we really get that private investment of the people who really see a promising technology, lithium-ion batteries, for instance, and say, I'm going to be the best in the world, and invest in that?
Pretty complicated question. I think the first question about integrated policy, yes, I think whether you're talking about energy policy in total or, you know, transportation, that, you know, sort of patchwork regulations or properly intended incentives that get overlaid or aren't created in coordination skew investment and they skew decisions. So, I mean, are we going to get a national energy policy? I don't know, but I think everybody would agree one would be helpful. And, you know, when it comes to California, with our renewable energy policies as well as our clean transportation policies, even if we don't have a coordinated national policy, if pretty soon some other states or the federal government doesn't start enacting some things that bring the rest of the nation into the process, you know, California could wind up being an island. I mean, we can't we have a lot of consumers, but I don't know we have enough to reinvent the transportation industry just with policy in the state of California. So there should be some types of national standards on both renewable energy and clean transportation, one would think. As far as the capital formation and things, we're, I think, in a phase where the old formulas are out of play, so we're going to have to collectively figure out how to do it. You know, the venture capital community is kind of burned over things that have happened over the last 10 years, and the old-fashioned, you know, Bell Labs and those type of institutions don't exist anymore, so there probably is some role for government at this point.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, here we go. Here, we'll do this one first, and then yours, and then we'll have to end.
The advantage is sitting up front, I guess. This question's for Heather. In your chart, I saw a tremendous amount of pollution from ships at sea. Much more than I ever realized. I didn't realize there were that many ships even out at sea. But are there any commercial ships other than military ships that operate on nuclear power? Or is it economically unfeasible or politically unfeasible?
Probably both. There are not any that are operating on that. There's a lot of interest that seems to be building in use of LNG fuel for vessels that seems to be applied right now in sort of ferry boats and smaller ships, not really the large ocean-going vessel container ships at this point. But I think it's building. There's building interest in that. Some of that has to do with trying to maintain better control on fuel costs in the future, because one of the things that we're seeing here in California, we have a rule that requires vessels to use lower sulfur distillate fuels when they're within 24 nautical miles of the coast. And that is being sort of phased in over time, and then there's a requirement that's going to apply to all of North America that will require even cleaner low sulfur fuel within 200 nautical miles of the coast. And there's a lot of talk about how that's going to really increase the costs of operation using that cleaner fuel. So there's a lot of folks that are looking for alternatives. That's why seawater scrubbers are one of the things that people are looking at, but LNG fuel is another one of those things. I think nuclear fuel has been proven in military applications. Whether or not that's going to be palatable for folks to have all of the vessels convert to nuclear fuel, I think we'll have to see where the future takes us.
Thank you.
Both of the ports are taking national and international leadership in all these advanced technologies. Long Beach Transit has the largest fleet of hybrids, and recently they're going out with the RFQ for the largest fleet of electrics. And of course, for Cal State Long Beach, how can the staff and the administrator, how can they do better to be a part or to support or to synergize your activity locally?
Was the question how can the technology developers better help what we're doing?
What can this university do?
Oh, what can the university do?
To augment you, to give you the resources, the manpower, the technology, the research, the testing, whether it's collection of data. What can the university do more than what it's doing to support your mission, specifically for the atrium research and also for the ports? And the national labs or the research groups, a little bit further distance, but what can this university do better to support your mission? Because each one of you are leaders in your field in terms of advancing these technologies, advancing these products, and deploying them in the field.
Well, and I think the university actually is doing quite a few things that are helping towards that direction. We've talked with the folks at the CDOT Technology Center, some of the other professors as well. I think some of the things that we're focused on, and really where our technology advancement program comes into play, is we're looking for technologies that are, they've gone through all of the development, they've gone through all of the research. These are technologies that are ready to be deployed, and they just need to be tested in the port environment. So all of those early stages, getting those technologies so that they are ready to be actually implemented and deployed and demonstrated in-use operations, that background to bring those technologies along and really prove them through the process, more focused energy and attention in that area can make more products come to market and have more options available for us. So I think that there is a lot of work that's being done in that. I think it can be frustrating, I think, a little bit for those of us that are hoping to have the solution happen today. This is a process, and it takes a lot of time, but I think we are working on it, and I think the university is doing quite a bit.
Peter, do you have any comment on that?
I would just add that my list, I agree with everything Heather just said, and my list would be research and development, public information, programs like this, education for future careers, again, programs like this, and the education that you're offering, and the fleets, or the equipment that it's operated by the university itself is a good place to start in terms of demonstrating and helping to create those markets.
But that's a good question. I'll answer it a little bit, even though I'm not one of the speakers here. As a harbor commissioner, that's a very good question, and maybe there are a few port people out here, and I'm not going to commit anything, but maybe we need to have some type of grant program, and maybe even San Diego Gas and Electric, everybody, if they look at having some type of grant program, once you've developed or done some R&D on a technology, to maybe do some more development to get it ready to be able to use, where the port or someone else can pull it in and do the advanced development into a demonstration to see if it really works. So that's a very good question. It's something, I, as a harbor commissioner, want to explore more. So I really appreciate the question. I can't answer it 100%, but I do appreciate the question, because maybe there is more we can do to help the university, move things along. Okay, and I think that with that, I think Dean Golshani will coming back up here. But what I'd like to do is have you all thank the speakers again. I think they just did a fabulous job. And I'd like to thank you all for being out here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate this. This was a great session again. Very grateful to speakers, to our moderator, to organizers. And let me see what we have here. Hold on with me. Small gifts on behalf of the... Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Of course.
Thank you very much.